Welcome to the Neuroperformance Podcast with your host, Andy Murphy. Join us as we delve into the advanced high-performance tactics he uses with his elite clientele across the globe. Let's unlock a whole new world of business potential together.
You need hard work. At certain points in the trajectory of your business, you need hard work. Your fundraising, you can't say, oh, we're closing the round, I'm taking vacation for 2 weeks. We're doing M&A, I'm only going to work a couple hours. No, you're going to have to grind it. But that's not the answer.
Welcome to the Neuroperformance Podcast with your host, Andy Murphy. Join us as we delve into the advanced high-performance tactics he uses with his elite clientele across the globe. Let's unlock a whole new world of business potential together.
What's going on, Neuroperformers, and welcome to episode 438. Hope you're amazing as always. I always like to say this at the start of the show. I really mean it. We've got a good episode today. It's not a training, it's not an interview, it's a clip that I'm breaking down. And it's really cool because if you've never checked out the Diary of a CEO podcast, it's a goodie. He brings on some really good people. And this is an interview we did with Marc Randolph. And Marc Randolph was the co-founder, pretty big deal, of Netflix. And he was also the former CEO. What's cool about this clip that I break down is his concept of testing and measuring. If we're talking about marketing, we can talk about everything on this show, but we'll talk about marketing. And it's really interesting as an entrepreneur because we can get so stuck in imperfection. Do you know what I mean? We can get so focused on that image in our head, and it can be the detriment of actually getting it out there, right? We call it perfectionist syndrome. And we've all suffered with that a little bit in some stages of our life, whether you are a CEO running a big company or a founder, or you're just getting started, or whatever you're doing, online brand or your next gen or your whatever you're running, right? We can hold ourselves back from pulling that trigger. I don't mean literally pulling the trigger. Well, maybe you're a special forces guy listening to this, but literally pulling the trigger, because the truth is we don't know what the result is actually going to be. We don't, right? We can visualize it, which is what I'm going to talk about today, training on neurology to be able to think, feel, and act in a specific way. So when we're in that intense pressure of a scenario, our body is able to handle that pressure, which means then we're able to make very strategic and high-level decisions, right? That's what my thing is. From the marketing aspect or a CEO aspect, they're my clients, but I don't do that, right? I can build brands, I can do all this stuff, but I'm not the guy who's sitting there tweaking analytics on an ad set. I'm not the guy who's relentlessly driving the vision forwards like a CEO. That's not my thing, right? We've got to discover our own superpowers and bring in that team around you to be able to create the vision that you started with. And so what's fascinating about this is so many different things. Imagine the wealth of experience that this guy's got for a start, right? And do you remember Netflix? Do you remember? Maybe you're too young, but I'm old now. But Netflix was literally DVDs. It was a DVD model. It wasn't an online subscription model. It was basically becoming a disruption model from Blockbuster. Do you remember Blockbuster videos? It was, which, just pressing pause there, I feel that tactile kinesthetic is kind of missing these days, because what was cool about Blockbusters is you literally you get there early on a Friday because you knew or whatever you were going to watch videos that Friday, and you didn't know if the video was going to be in stock. You had no idea what you were going to end up with and walk out with at the once you chose your movies. You didn't know. So from a dopamine aspect, it was kind of really cool. It was kind of really cool because what you went in for didn't mean that's what you were going to get. And sometimes you'd end up with the most random movies that you could ever imagine. But that was also cool too. And because there wasn't millions of selections, you kind of just you weren't in it for perfectionism model, right? You were just in it to experience an alternate reality, which is a movie. These days, well, it's kind of like, how many times are we scrolling through Netflix or Amazon or wherever you're watching your videos? We're just scrolling, and there's so much choice that we end up spending, like, I don't know, I'm just making these stats up, 20% of our time literally scrolling. Why? Because that creates dopamine, which is what we want really from the movie, but we're actually getting it from just scrolling. Not the idea. But anyway, back into this interview. It's only a little 15-minute clip. Obviously, it'll probably be about 30 minutes by the time I've finished. But it's like things that we go into, or he goes into, and I'm commenting about the actual psychology behind it. But it's even stress testing the idea, the importance of stress testing idea, but also not being attached to the concept, the time it actually takes to implement and test that idea. And we go into all things like that. Why is that important for you? Because I don't know again what stage of business you're at, but the truth is we all hit levels, thresholds, psychological boundaries, right? And we always want what's in the next stage outside of the boundary, but we can hold ourselves back from experiencing that so much. This is where I find what we do with lateral thinking and all these different exercises with clients is we're constantly creating expansion, looking at possibilities, right? Because if we don't know what the possibility even is, then we can't even understand, is it possible? Is the idea possible, right? The possibility possible. So why don't we just jump into this? But just before we do, imagine right now, right here, right now, as you're listening to this, right? Thinking the things that you're thinking. Imagine if this was your brand. Imagine if it was your brand going out to 100,000 people a month. Imagine if it was blasted across all social media. Imagine if you had the raw file and you got to literally do a video interview with me. Would that be cool? Yeah, it would be cool. And so you now have the ability to do that. So in the show description, you're going to see a link. Why don't you see if you can be on the show? It's not for everybody. It's a very strict criteria, but you might be the one. Also, while you're imagining, imagine this. Imagine if you had your brand and your brand was suddenly became the Neuro Performance Podcast official sponsor. Yeah, we're only bringing on again a handful of people that are going to be over 12 months the official brand connected with what? Well, all the amazing guests we've had on, all the amazing future guests we're about to have on, and this incredible content. And you can have your brand connected with this. You can have you being associated with all of you amazing listeners out there. And if that sounds something that you'd be interested in, then why don't you hit those show description and then, see if you can be a part of the show.
What about hard work? Does it matter?
Well, since you ask it so simply, I'd say no. Or it certainly is not the most important thing. In fact, I think hard work leading to success is a myth. And let me give you two examples, okay? The first is to qualify what I mean. I work with a lot of, as we spoke earlier before we actually began the session, about how younger people are different places in their life than older people, especially with career and how they think about it. And earlier in my life, I used to do triathlons, the races that combine swimming and then biking and then running. And back when I used to do them, they don't do it quite the same way anymore. It would be a mass water start. You have 400 or 500 people who, the gun sounds, and all 500 of them plow into the water simultaneously. Not a phased start. And as you can imagine, it is a shit show. You mean you're getting kicked and your goggles are being knocked off and you're being held underwater. And you quickly realize that if you want to be able to survive in this mass start, you're going to sprint for those first 400, 500, 600 yards to get yourself far enough in the front of the pack that you have open water. And in my opinion, work life is kind of like that. When you're younger, when you don't really know what you're doing, when you have to go down a lot of false ends because you're not sure they're productive, you better work your ass off. You better sprint. You better work 3 times harder than everybody else in the company. So it's essential. But ideally, you get yourself far enough ahead that you recognize, I can't go at this pace for the entirety of the triathlon. I needed to get myself some breathing room, but now I can back off.
Let me jump in there, crew. I love what you just said, right? And I'm sure you can relate. I'm sure that you can relate. No matter what age you're at or whatever stage of the business that you're at, you've probably had or could recognize that massive learning curve, right? And the version of you that began the business is not the version of you that's going to end the business or exit the business. And it's not the version of you that goes through all these different stages. We grow, we expand, like I was explaining before. In every stage, we begin to see the world differently, very differently. Our beliefs about ourselves, what's possible is different, right? Our focus becomes different. And also what he's talking about there is that when we're younger, our physical ability is so much greater than when you're older. Now that can be down to health, sure, but it also can come down to the simple fact that you have wisdom, right? And that wisdom means that you don't need to run around seeing what's behind every single door. You can be really selective about what choices you make because you have, again, an understanding of what happened or what went wrong before. And when I'm working with CEOs, I think it's a very important skill, right? Because we have reference points to the past. And what this does, like a habit, right? And what does a habit do? I think I explained this on the last episode, maybe the one before. But a habit is a very important skill of the brain, right? And the body, but the brain, right? What habits do, habits kind of get a bad rap, right? They kind of do. But it's only the bad habits that are a problem. Good habits are very, very important. This is how we breathe, This is how we have behaviors. But it's also the fact that what the brain is really doing is it's saving or preserving neural energy. Neural energy so the brain can be more efficient in what it needs to do. And really, when you're at the highest levels of business, it's not about creating everything. It's about making strategic decisions, about micro decisions under the amount of weight or pressure or stress, whatever you want to call it, right? All slightly different things. So when we begin to understand that, then we have to reserve ourselves or preserve ourselves. And just like he was talking about with triathletes, and I've worked with quite a few in Ironman, and you can't just go right? Very British saying I'm about to say, balls to the wall, right? You can't just go balls to the wall in life and business. And it reminds me of when I was young. That's what I would do because that's all I knew, right? I didn't really know what direction I was going in, have an idea, and I'd give it everything I've got. And how many of those ideas really were successful? Well, I don't know, not many. I'm sitting here in front of you now and I've done okay. But if you really had a mentor or you had the right people around you, you could accelerate really, really well, so much faster. But when you're dealing with like a company like Netflix and a brand new disruption model, there is nothing to base it off, right? If you're growing a business right now yourself, then more than likely there's other competitors. And those other competitors, you can learn from their experiences, right? You could look at their business model. You can fine tune it, right? You can look at how it's managed. You can look at how the culture is, and good and bad again, right? So when you start understanding this, as you go through these different stages of business or even different stages of life, you don't want what you wanted before. Does that make sense? You just don't want it. And as you get older, the shiny, the bling, all of those things that when you were younger kind of were very important. But they were all important generally for the wrong reason. And this is where you see the younger generation not understanding this yet. But again, they got to go through it, right? Because truly the value of business, yes, it's creating impact in the world for sure, but it's also enjoying your life. Because if you go inside of yourself, there's a real strong driver. There's something that's pulling you towards something, right? And it could be for your family. It could be that simple, right? It could be to change the world like Elon Musk. But it also could be, and this is something to be very careful of, the driver could also be pushing away from pain. Does that make sense? And if you're pushing away from pain to achieve the inertia or the consistent motivation, then the challenge with that is you're always going to be like unconsciously, subconsciously in pain. So this brings up a whole different topic that I'm not going to talk about today. But I just want you to check out what that driver is that's heading you towards something. And that, what's the fuel source? What's that fuel source, right? Is it jet fuel that burns out? Or is it, I don't know, have we found the fuel? Wind power, right? Solar, but solar done correctly. So if you can really change what that fuel is, that can be everlasting.
So, yeah, at certain points in your career, you need hard work. At certain points in the trajectory of your business, you need hard work. Your fundraising, you can't say, oh, we're closing the round. I'm taking vacation for 2 weeks. We're doing M&A. I'm only going to work a couple hours. No, you're going to have to grind it. But that's not the answer. All right, one more little story, which is part 2 to this, which is why I say that it's a myth for hard work. During one part of my career, I lived in Europe. I was doing international marketing for a big software company. We had an office in Paris, and I lived in Paris. But I was meeting every week with the marketing people in our other branches. So probably 4 days out of 5, I was flying. Fly to Copenhagen one day, then I'd fly down to Milan, then I might fly to London, then I might fly to Madrid in 1 week. So I spent a lot of time at the airport. And because I'm sometimes not that organized, I'd be late. And you would find me just sprinting down the concourse in my blazer and my wool coat, trying to desperately make the plane. And what I found out was that probably 49% of the time, I'd pull up to the gate and the plane was delayed, and I'd have to wander onto the plane, no problem at all. I could have made it on crutches. And instead, I'd sit there marinating in my sweat for another hour before the plane took off. Or the other 49% of the time, I'd come sprinting down the concourse and you'd see the plane halfway out in the runway about to take off. And what I realized is it didn't make a difference whether you ran for a plane or not. That you're either going to make it or you weren't going to make it. And that running didn't make the difference. And I vowed then and there I'd never run for a plane again. And I never have. And I'm telling you that story because it's a metaphor in that so many entrepreneurs spend all this time running for planes. They are up all night polishing their deck. They're reviewing the work of people to make sure the spelling is correct. They're double checking every detail. They are working so hard. But I know from experience that it's like running for the plane. Most of the time, doesn't make a difference. You don't lose the deal at 2:00 that morning because you didn't check the fonts. You lost that deal 4 weeks ago when you didn't have some fundamentals right, or you just weren't the right company to begin with. No matter how hard you worked, you weren't going to change the outcome. And that is the key to having some balance in your life as an entrepreneur, is this recognition that if you're smart about the things that you choose to focus on, you make 99% of the difference. And that all that extra work does not really change the outcome any.
Kind of goes back to what I was trying to say to you before, right? The culture of entrepreneurism, it's changed slightly, but you still got a lot of still high level or famous entrepreneurs. For example, Alex Hormozi, right? Alex Hormozi on the scale of business isn't massive, right? But on the scale of online marketing, he's very famous, right? And one of the things he says, which kind of drives me crazy, because he's talking about himself, not other people. He says, if you're not working, you're not driving the business forward. So the first thing he does in the morning is he just goes to his laptop or computer and just instantly starts working. He says morning routines are stupid and all of these things. But it simply depends on the person, right? It depends on their nervous system regulation. It depends on what they've been through. It also depends on what I was talking about before, on what emotional driver is driving. For Alex, I think he's great. I think he's awesome, extremely talented, and all the rest of it. What I know from looking at his psychology, right, what I'm mind reading or guessing, right, is that the emotional driver that is actually driving in it isn't the healthiest. Does it create results? Absolutely. But not everybody can run at that speed or wants to run at that speed, right? And that's okay. That's okay. Everybody's different. Everybody's all the rest of it, including Alex. Alex is awesome. So what I love working with clients is that it's in CEOs, right? Especially female CEO. If you're a female CEO, hit me up. Yeah, you're awesome. You're you're awesome for a few different reasons, and I'll talk about that another time. But it's a case of when you are not on your A game, right? When you're not laser focused, when you're not unpacking stress and resetting yourself, right? When you don't have the ability to have this high level awareness over your physiology and your mental state and all of these things, right? If your images in your head aren't dialed in, if you get the idea. What happens is you think you're performing at your world class level. You think you are making decisions at a world class level, or I should say at your world class level, right? Because if you want to play the game, there's always someone at another level. But the truth is, if you're not dialed in, you are not making the highest level strategic decisions, which then it can exponentially get you to where you want to go. It speeds up time, what I call folding time, right? And that's what he's talking about right now, right? It's kind of been successful, hasn't he? You know what I mean? So he kind of has a lot of experience. He kind of knows what he's talking about. And that's the difference. And you're going to hear more about that in a minute. So I just want to give you the understanding if take the time to build yourself into the ultimate version of you that then is able to make or see this higher level strategy, which then you are able to step into, because whatever unfolds in business, because we really don't know, but as life unfolds, as business unfolds, you are in that peak version of you that is able to handle that new environment or new scenario, but not just handle it, thrive in it, expand it, grow it. Does that make sense?
And in that analogy of running for the plane, is the key thing to have just better prepared further upstream? If we stick to the analogy, just have made a better decision to leave the house at a better time.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. I mean, if you want to make the plane, you leave earlier. And again, it's not sometimes, listen, you're going to stroll down the concourse. You don't need to run. And if the plane left on time, running's not going to make the difference. If the plane's late, running didn't make the difference. Mm-hmm. Either way, you made it or didn't make it. The amount of times that running for it was the gating item between whether you made it or not is like infinitesimal. So what's the point of running? And and I really fundamentally believe that is that if I can be really smart about which problems I choose to focus on, I'll make the difference. I do not need to get everything right, because most things don't make a difference. Some things do.
Some things do. And some of the small things that made a difference to your business seem to have been discovered through a process of sort of experimentation and failure. When I look back through your story at you trying to get sort of Ntflix to work and get product market fit, you referenced it a second ago. This idea of no late fees seemed to be quite pivotal. An idea you had to remove the late fees. I find this interesting because there's going to be entrepreneurs that build their idea and then bang their head against the wall and it doesn't work. And then I hear so often, whether it's from Brian Chesky at Airbnb or from someone else, Daniel at Spotify, that there seemed to be this one change that was quite pivotal to their business at some point. So my question becomes like, how do I know? How do I find the thing? So can you explain to me why this no late fees thing and any of these other small changes that changed the game, and what was the system that led you to them?
We're talking about really finding product market fit. Product market fit, if I have to give a definition, is when you recognize you finally have something that customers actually do want. And it's recognized because all of a sudden the momentum of your business dramatically shifts. Yeah. All of a sudden things go into high gear. All of a sudden acquiring customers is so much easier. All of a sudden they're sticking around. It's just this instantaneous, oh my God, we found it. And up until that point, it's this constant struggle of trying one thing after another, trying to increment your way closer and closer and closer. When I mentioned that, at the beginning, there wasn't a lot of business model innovation with Ntflix. If you ordered a disc, we mailed it to you. We charged you give you a due date. If you missed the due date, we had late fees. And the reality is the idea was ridiculous. It didn't work. Nobody would rent from us. And if you did rent from us once, you didn't rent from us again. And we kind of had this realization that, okay, we got to begin figuring things out. And thus began this 1.5 year long process of trying to figure out some way to get people to rent DVDs by mail from us. And we tried almost everything you could think of, hundreds of things. And I kind of talk about this a bunch, that I had no shortage of ideas. I mean, I had lots of things I wanted to try. And if there was a problem that I had, it was that I was a bit of a perfectionist back then. And so all these tests that I'd want to run, I'd want them to be perfect. So we would, lovingly argue over every word of copy, and we would do custom photography, and we would check every link, and we'd stress test the site. And it might take us 3 weeks or a month to prepare for this test. And we'd test this new idea, and then it would not work, wouldn't do anything. And we'd kind of look at each other and go, we just wasted a month. So, okay, faster. When then we do a test in 2 weeks and it would still fail. Okay, faster. And we do it in a week and faster. And we eventually started getting to the point we could do a test every day or multiple tests every day. And it turns out that once you go that fast, things get very, very sloppy. So we would have the wrong image, or it would have the watermark on it, or the pages we had Greeked would still be Greeked. We'd have bad links. We'd crash the site. But that was such an incredibly big insight for us, because it turns out that it didn't make a difference.
I hope you got that, right? And it kind of links into everything I've been saying. And I love this analogy. I love this story, because you're listening to someone who's got such a vast amount of experience in this, because he really, really found that model. And as I say, he tested hundreds of things, and he goes into it a little bit more deeper in a minute. I'll use a slightly different analogy. So imagine going on a journey, right? It could be whatever. Let's go across America. I'm not in America, I'm in Central America right now, so it's kind of America, but it's not America. But we're going from New York to LA, or LA to New York, or whatever you want, right? And there's different ways to get there, isn't it? You can fly, you can walk, you could ride a bike, you could go in the fastest known car on earth. And all have a very different experience. Do they all get you to the same destination? Well, yeah, they all get you to the same place, but you're going to have a radically different experience, right? And let's take this as if you were driving those vehicles. So you were flying the plane, or you were driving the sports car, or you were riding the bike, or you were walking. Well, of course, you're going to be in it if you're walking, right? You're going to be in your body, but you know what I mean? If you are driving the sports car, what's your focus? Yeah, making sure that you stay on path, right? Making sure that you go as fast as possible to that destination, and there's consequences of that, right? What's the consequences? If you're going so fast, well, you might lose control and crash. You're definitely going to miss the scenery, right? The things that are happening to the left or the right. But in business, those things that are happening to the left or the right are also opportunities. They're also relationships. They're also ideas, right? And so you could also be walking. Walking's going to take a long time. Is it the most efficient thing? No. Are you going to see everything? Yeah, you're going to notice the breeze, the flowers, the smells. Same if you're riding a bike. If you're riding a bike, it's going to take you a long, long time, but it's way faster than walking. But are you going to notice more things? Yeah, of course you are, right? Than the sports car. If you're flying a plane, right? I don't know where I'm going with these analogies, but if you're flying a plane, you're going to have a very different perspective. You're going to have such a third-party perspective, right? And a third-party perspective. So does that mean, well, yeah, you're not driving as fast as a sports car. You have a higher level or observer effect, right? Over the land. So you're going to start to see the birds, the weather changing. You're going to see what's happening on the ground, right? So all of these are different contexts, but they're all going to get you to the same result. What he's trying to say there, or I'm trying to say what he's saying, is that if we're going so fast, we're going to make mistakes. And I've been, back in the day, I would try to run so fast. And again, you'd get somewhere. Was it where you wanted to go? Sometimes, but there's biological consequences of that, right? And there's also relationship consequences of that. Because have to, when you're driving at such high speed, you have to lock in. You have to lock in so much because you want to make sure that you are safe. So you can't have any distractions. If you're flying a plane, Well, it depends it depends on what plane, right? I get it. But we're talking about a normal plane, right? Maybe a prop plane without jets, right? So it's a little bit slower. But you get what I'm trying to say. So, and we still don't know what the testing and measuring of the exercise that we're doing is actually going to accomplish. We still don't know. Now, we hope to get to the other side, LA or New York, right? We hope we get there, but we truly know that we're going to arrive? No, you might decide halfway through, you know what? I'm good here. I'm happy here. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to set my life up here and I'm going to enjoy this for a while before we go to stage 2. Or I'm just going to stay here. So we have an expectation that we're going to achieve a certain result, but that result can be so much bigger than what we ever imagined. It can be so much simpler than we ever imagined. But the truth is, we're going to get to where we're going to get to. Does that make sense? So we have to be that optimized version of us, because when, again, things unfold, and we have to be prepared.
That if it was a bad idea, even spending a month crafting this perfect test wasn't going to make it a good idea. But if it had even an inkling of being a good idea, no matter how bad the test was, it shone through. Customers would immediately perk their head up. They'd raise their hand. They would fight to do it. They'd call us. They'd reboot the site. It was this incredibly loud signal that there was something there. And it goes back to what we said before, which is that it's not about having a good idea. It's about building this whole process and this culture and this system to try lots of bad ideas. And we got really, really good at trying lots of bad ideas, one after another, hundreds of them, each one informing us to some little bit about what to try next. And eventually we got to this point where we had these 2 big ideas left. And one of them was, at that point, Ntflix was pretty big. We had probably in our warehouse several 100,000 DVDs. And I remember one day Reed and I were in the warehouse and looking at all these DVDs and going, it's such a shame that all these DVDs are here in the warehouse where they're not doing anyone any good. I wonder if there's a way to store them at our customers' houses. Let them keep them. And then when they're done, they mail it back. We'll just replace it. And rather than having them have to pay each time they replace it, let's just have a monthly fee, a subscription. And they can rent as often as they want. There's no due dates and no late fees. And it was a ridiculous idea. But when we tested it, it was that mythical product market fit. It worked. People loved it. They couldn't get enough of it. They told their friends. They did not cancel their subscriptions.
So once again, Neuroperformers, like I said before, I'm going to be showing lots of different products and services and other brands that I really, really like. But right now, you can be a part of the show. Whether you want to be a guest or you want to be a sponsor of the Neuroperformance podcast, that's entirely up to you. But if you want to get exposed to all of these people just like you, then you know where to find me. Click on the show description, click on the link, and let's chat.
That's all for this episode of the Neuro-Performance Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to stay connected, rate, review, and visit andymurphy.online to take the next step towards unlocking your pure potential. See you next time.